Saying that the state should replace all state-provided welfare services for people living under the poverty line with cash handouts. I'm a call for the Prime Minister to declare the motion and stand. Thank you.
For far too long, the poor people is not having avenue to actually alleviate them from poverty. From side opening government, this is very simple. We believe by giving them cash handouts is the best way for us to alleviate them from poverty because of few reasons. But before that, let's be clear. First, from side opening government, you replace welfare specific for poor people, which essentially means that it will not affect rich people, so it will specifically target poor people. Like for example, subsidies and giving food coupons will replace that all in all. So the basis of this, the reason for this is because we want to guarantee that individuals within the school have their basic rights guaranteed as holistically. Second, we want to make equivalent. We want to give individuals on the ground, poor people, equivalent money that the government would spend in terms of them already spending within the school, like them giving welfare. So we want to make the money equivalent, giving them the equivalent money. But third, we will not make this mutually exclusive. Thank you. Like for example, other government assistance, like for example, giving loans or other, like for example, giving loans and other government assistance because it already exists within the school. The problem here is that we recognize within the school that there are already forms of like people giving donations, like NGOs giving donations and zakat money within those instances. But within those forms of money is still not enough for these people to be alleviated from poverty. And that's a very big harm that we see within the school. Before I move to my points of argumentations, any points of clarification? Thank you. First, why is this the best way for us to actually alleviate poor people from poverty? Let's recognize one thing. We see poor, like even though you give welfare to individuals on the ground, poor people, these individuals do not have even the capital. They do not even have the purchasing power to even begin with. So meaning they don't have enough capital. And if you look at within the score, their worth within the market is also not there. So necessarily here in speaker, by giving them cash handouts, what do we need? What we're doing here is that we're going to improve people in terms of giving them much more capital. We're going to give them like the ability for them to improve their business, for them to use those forms of money for education. Because even though within the school there are already form of welfare being given to individuals, we don't think those form of welfare is enough. Because you could also see like poor people can't even buy things in bulk, right? When you buy, because they can't even buy things in bulk, because if you buy things in bulk, it's still much for these people. The point being here is that when you give them capital for them to actually purchase, give them capital for them to purchase like goods and services within the store, that's a great a good way for them to alleviate from poverty, right? But second, we think the current government system or the current government system nowadays is only giving the bare minimum for them to achieve alleviate from poverty. What it is mean? This means that the government welfare service system only ensures that you don't die. It only ensures that by giving food, it only ensures you to actually ensures you giving shelter above your head. We think this is also a good thing, but we think this is not enough when we're actually talking about the idea of alleviating poverty for individuals within the school. So necessarily when you give them the capital to do so, and on our side, these people will be ensured of they can actually buy the goods and have the purchasing power to do those kinds of things, to have these kinds of things, just because why is it good? But second, we think at the end of the day, if we do have this form of government welfare system within the school, it does not improve at all in terms of your socio-economic condition or your economic condition as a whole. Because just because you have a welfare services, you still, like we can even see poor people within the school who still can't afford education, who still don't have the purchasing power to even like have the form of basic commodities within the school. So the conclusion to this first level of argumentation, second conclusion, at the end of the day, it's much more highly improbable for them to stay poor and to stay in that vicious cycle at the end of the day. But secondly, how do we solve this kind of problem? First, we think that by giving the option for them, giving the capital, it gives them the ability for them to go beyond. What do I mean by this? By going beyond, what I mean by this is that people can now go apply for education. People can now set up businesses within the school. They can have those kinds of things because they have now have capital. But second, we think by giving them or providing them money, it is much more better for them having rather than having welfare services that currently doesn't actually help them, but by giving them capital, as they have their purchasing power to increase their worth within the market, at least they are better off on the outside of the market. But third, even if to an extent, we think these people are these people can at least ensure them not being any worse off, because if you see the status quo, they're already worse off in the status quo, right? So like to an extent, if we do help them with our cash handout within those instances, even though even everything with like everything from opening government affairs, at least we ensure that these welfare things that are still like even though we say this word, these welfare things are still expensive. At least we allow these individuals to buy those kinds of things, and at least to buy those kinds of things.
How are you going to ensure that they will spend the money on these outcomes that you want them to spend on?
First, I think to a large extent, people can always decide. Like people can always decide like they want for education and all those kinds of things. But second, even if they don't spend within those instances, they still have a choice. And like even if they don't spend, they don't spend any of those outcomes that you want, they will still be within status quo on your side. So like in both paradigms, also you have to decide which is it, right? We think it's about market. It's all better if you go with open government. But second, how do we create a market for these people? And this is a very good point of engagement, right? Let's recognize one thing. In terms of people within status quo, they don't have any market for them to actually prosper. They don't even have any market for them to alleviate themselves from poverty. So the problem here is that when you don't have the purchasing power, Mr. Speaker, it's much more hard for them to actually have this form of alleviation from poverty, right? So the first thing that we do from say open government is that we create a demand. So when these individuals have a capital from within status quo, actually we create a demand because they now have a purchasing power to actually purchase things like, for example, purchasing basic commodities, purchasing basic commodities within those instances. So what happens? The conclusion here is that it creates a market within the nation. So what happens is that investors will be much more problem to actually go to within this community because there already a demand within those instances, right? So we think it's much more better because people actually create their own demand or create their own demand for instances. But second, we think it also creates a new market because now what happens here, individuals can also create their own new because within these poor communities, there's also going to be, for example, new people get for example, cheaper phones, so internet lines, all these kinds of things is very good. For instance, like all these kinds of things pretty much pertinent for us to actually alleviate ourselves from poverty. For all these reasons, I recommend this.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now, Chair from the Leader of Opposition. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, it is regrettable that there are individuals who live below the poverty line, and these are individuals that we need to protect. But it's also regrettable that we have to sacrifice every other individual that exists within status quo at the point in which we institute this policy, ladies and gentlemen. Because what was missed in this case of opening government is that the position that they have to take in this debate is that they will remove all ability for the state to help and assist all individuals at the expense of creating and protecting these specific group of individuals. We agree that the rural population as well as individuals within a lower income bracket has to be a focus in which when we institute a particular budget for a country, but we think we also have to make a balance and serve every single individual in the society to ensure that we can act as a responsible state and alleviate poverty whilst at the same time we don't sacrifice any other individual, ladies and gentlemen. Opening opposition will be okay with some cash handouts being given to these individuals, but we think that to a larger majority, all the services still have to be provided by the state, ladies and gentlemen. Because we will argue from opening opposition that the position that we take in this debate is that oftentimes these individuals that are below the poverty line often have short-term financial calculation in the decisions that they make, ladies and gentlemen. And oftentimes we have to support an ability for them to be enfranchised in the long term as opposed to having an immediate benefit of having cash in their hands. I'm going to be talking about two things. Number one, why we don't think that the right to decide and spend is absolute, especially for individuals within this income bracket. Secondly, how do we tackle poverty more efficiently? But before that, several point of responses that don't necessarily fit in. Firstly, let's look at the idea of cash handouts, because they will argue to you that the idea of cash handouts right now is that you have capital to be able to spend and invest as an individual. But let's look at the nature of cash handouts, ladies and gentlemen. We will argue from opening opposition that oftentimes cash handouts is not a massive amount that is utilized by the state at the point in which they give to these individuals. Even in even in Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen, when you get brief from the state of Malaysia, oftentimes it is a small amount, like 500 ringgit per family that falls within that income bracket. We think that the sort of capital that you are envisioned for them to have will not necessarily ensure that they will be able to get out of poverty. But at the point in which we give them cash handout and balancing it out with other state services means that we allow for a sustainable framework of living that ensures that they can access services at the same time, still have some means to decide what they want to do with these cash handouts, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, they told you that markets can be created, it can be a lot better now. We don't think that this is true. Especially when there's no ability to control at what point your investment goes to the specific markets, ladies and gentlemen. Oftentimes, that's why we are the determinant of what services you are supposed to opt into and what services you should not opt into, ladies and gentlemen. Thirdly, on this idea of at least we provide a bare minimum, therefore these individuals will more likely die out. We don't think that this is true. But even if it's true, right, sometimes the bare minimum is enough, because we think what we ensure on the outside of the house is some ability to control how you best live your life, especially for an individual that does not have a sustainable framework of living, ladies and gentlemen. On the converse, there is no ability for you to determine an objective measurable outcome of how you move individuals out within from this income bracket. We don't think that that's the goal. Firstly, let's look at, lastly, we need to focus on alleviation of poverty. We think that the first thing we have to acknowledge right now is that the debate can't just operate and prioritize individuals living below the poverty line, because right now you're talking about abolishing all state-provided welfare. This means that oftentimes individuals within the middle class, as well as low to middle class income, will be affected at the point in which they can't access things like government insurance, subsidy, as well as healthcare, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we think that this does not translate to the alleviation of poverty like opening government wants to achieve. And let's recharacterize the debate that was missing from opening government. Firstly, let's look at the groups of individuals living below the poverty line, ladies and gentlemen. It is regrettable that we may or may not have to generalize these individuals within a certain bracket, but we will argue that they are statistically far less likely to be able to access things like state institutions, things like education, ladies and gentlemen. Oftentimes, that's why we allow for these other services to exist to ensure there is a safety net to protect these individuals. So firstly, how do you ensure that they best utilize the sort of money that you are given right now in the status quo? We think, and we will agree, that in some instances you are entitled and determined to ensure that you can spend money in a particular way. But we think right now, talking about the specific group of individuals that we are dealing with in this debate, we think that as a state, we are entitled to determine, given that you are living below the poverty line, ladies and gentlemen. Because as a comparative, this particular group of individuals are dependent on the state to ensure that there's some livelihood that they can live as individuals within society. We think that oftentimes we frame budgets around how do we best protect these lowest common denominators in society. How much do we allocate to healthcare? How much do we subsidize in terms of things like basic goods like rice and oil? How do we best not impose GST on these individuals? Especially when the dynamics that exist within these communities, ladies and gentlemen, is that oftentimes these group of individuals face short-term pressures to spend a lot more, especially given that they have liquid cash in their hands, ladies and gentlemen. Because we think that there is a fear that is cultivated within these communities that at the point in which you have cash in your hand, that you need to spend right now because there is no security or guarantee that I can get it later on, especially when handouts are not given on especially when handouts are often given on a sporadic basis and not given on a weekly basis, ladies and gentlemen. What we do on the outside is that we have a safety net that protects the most vulnerable of individuals, especially individuals who cannot make financial decisions. We are talking about children or people who are dependent upon those individuals that you grant handouts to. So even if in the scenario in which they can invest in a particular way, we think that there are other individuals who are within that calculation that may not have a say in how that money is spent, ladies and gentlemen. We will argue that people often invest in what they know the most. Therefore, things like insurance is never a priority, ladies and gentlemen, because it's not visceral, because it's not immediate to me and my position in society. Before I move on to closing.
Right. So if I as an individual somehow wouldn't know what to spend on, aren't I able to really perceive what I need to once I really need it? For example, if I'm really short on groceries, I can spend my money on that.
Okay.
Or if I need healthcare, I can spend on that.
Hang on, this is what I just said just now. The decision that people make oftentimes when they are buying things is that they don't think about the long-term calculations. Things like insurance and healthcare is never a priority. Oftentimes they buy things that they can indulge in, things like food that may not necessarily be healthy, ladies and gentlemen, because this is something that they're familiar with, this is something that they can relate to. Therefore, we think that's why we have things like government insurance and healthcare to ensure that decisions that they may or may not forget is something that the state can circumvent and ensure that there is a safety net. So, what we would do on the outside is that we may sacrifice some autonomy for the current generation to be able to spend and determine, but what we do is we protect all generations and ensure that there is intergenerational justice that is given out to individuals and to protect every single person within this income bracket, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, how do you best tackle poverty? We think that at this point, there's no ability for us to control allocation, especially when it comes to handouts, because there is no standard to determine whether or not we need to allocate more or allocate less. We think it is far more likely that you will engage in wasteful allocation of resource and the point in which you can't determine the economies of scale in which you are engaging right now. Because the most important part of the state budget is that you are able to plan and determine investment in how you best ensure every single individual in the society can access those things needed. Therefore, we think that right now, what they do on the other side of the house is they sacrifice individuals who are of the middle class as well as other individuals who may want to engage in the state services. We balance it out. I've never been proud of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, leader of opposition. To defend the case of the government, I'll be
Yeah.
No, okay.
Or is it because let's continue on. Mr. Speaker, opening opposition lawsuits being on two grounds primarily. First, they assume the case which one proposed, and in fact, they just thought, oh, we got the wrong case, and then decided to just fight it. And our case was never to say, look, no one in the whole country will get any form of state benefits, and we'll scrap all state benefits and use all that money to be poor people. I think opening government in fact was very clear in that proposal. I think it should run with it. The second failure, I think, is the biggest failure of opening opposition, is they never told us, they never ever told us how status quo will help solve or eliminate poverty. And at least that's something which we in open government attempted to do. We even told you how, even with status quo and the mechanism which we have in status quo, like just reload and all that jazz, it is really, really not working. So we did an explanation and hope it comes in the second speech thereafter. Let's get about those before we want to find a substantiation in the second speech opening government. The first thing I want to deal with is this idea that poor people can't think for themselves and are really, really stupid, which we think is an insult to poor people everywhere. Because they assume once you give money, suddenly these people they can't decide what to do with the money, they might spend it on, I don't know, some cigarettes and stuff like that. But there's never any substantiation as to why that's the case. In fact, we tell you, ladies and gentlemen, in the worst case scenario, even if poor people cannot decide what to do with the money, the least they will do is they will live in status quo. That means they will use that money to buy things which they already have in status quo. For example, you buy food, paying rent in a house and stuff like that. So it is exactly the same situation which will exist in a situation where you don't do when you don't have our proposal. No, thank you. So I think that is a misplaced idea. Secondly, she says, but they will not invest in things which are important, like insurance. And that was the only analysis which she gave in that respect. But hold on a minute, Mr. Speaker. Insurance is not important at all. Insurance, in fact, is important only to the upper middle class. If you are a lower middle class, even if you're under poverty line, really, insurance doesn't matter. If I tell you that poor people, once they give this amount, would buy insurance, we're fine with that, we're happy, they didn't decide it that way. No, thank you. Further, she talked about how it's not a massive amount, so 5 million imagine gives you every year. But hold on a minute, this is not the government handout which you have in status quo. In military, you cannot tell us that, oh, it's a 500 million thing. When if I specifically told you that the capital which you get is exactly the amount that you would have spent when you give welfare to some people. So it's about having additional money, which we think is very substantial. At least it's substantial enough for them to use that money as capital to drive them out of poverty. And we think that's an important factor, an important piece of analysis which came in the first speech, which they did not deal with. No, thank you. Further, they then said, oh, but the bare minimum is enough. They said they're fine with a world where poor people will forever be poor people. But they never told us why that's the case. I will first tell you later why that's really unfair.
why the reason poor people become poor people isn't by choice, but it's usually because of the way of the competitive nature of the state. That the state has a duty to make sure that there's a means for them to go out of poverty. No, thank you. Lastly, they say, what about people who don't have a say, like poor children, because the money goes to the father and mother, and then what about the poor people who can't decide? There's no standard allocation. Listen, these are nitpicky issues, but how much do we give money? Is it 1 million, 3 million, 2.6 million? Really, this I don't think matters. Because what matters most is that the money which you get is enough for them to decide what they want to use the money for. They can use it for their use of the kids, they can use it to invest in trust funds, they can use it by insurance with things for them and stuff like that. We think that the choice is theirs, and if they think they want to scale down on, I don't know, food, buy cheaper rice, for example, because they can use the extra money to buy more important things in life. For example, to go for education and stuff like that. I think that's a choice which we will respect. No, thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's after everything which opening opposition talk about. It's important to note at this juncture that a lot of things came in the Prime Minister's speech which was not negated, ladies and gentlemen. We talk about how when you give poor people capital, it creates a market in itself. That means now, instead what happens is that poor people doesn't need a market. And the reason why they don't have a market is because they don't have money to spend. When you have money to spend, you essentially create a market where people will tap into. So you create industries which will create products which are cheaper to make sure these poor people can afford it because now they have money. That's what we see in Africa. For example, people have computers with a lot of cursors so that you can share one computer with a whole big family. It also comes with, for example, cheaper mobile phones, cheaper internet plans and stuff like that. I don't think they didn't get that idea at all. I actually got some few articles closing them because they didn't give off me any of it.
Given that you're also scrapping things like free healthcare, and you're okay with them not buying insurance, why is it strategic for the state to invest their money in a position where they can't objectively measure where that money goes to and have some control?
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Because your first POI, the second part of it really doesn't gel together. We think this is that I'm saying in the POI that if there are things which the government feels are universal, for example, if it's a state which provides universal healthcare, that's not something we share. If it's a state where there is no universal healthcare, and healthcare is only provided for the poor, that is something which we will track. And if we think that it's the same as any other individuals, we think that's a fair deal is done. That we take away money for them to free insurance, and what you do with that money is up to you. You can invest in your own insurance plan, or if you think it's not important because you're a healthy family, then use that money for upward to create upward mobility. I think that's a fairer way, in fact, better for these poor people. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, what about when I argue the extension further in this side of the House? Looking for my paper here is. Mr. Speaker, we think that this is an important tool for social engineering. The first thing you have to understand that the problem with state-provided welfare when it comes to poor people is that it's bloody inefficient. It is inefficient, Mr. Speaker, because it's provided by government and the state government. There's no urgency, there's no real need for create upward mobility for poor people. The problem further is that also poor people feel comfortable in that situation. They feel that there's no need for me to work because there's free healthcare, I get some standing of roof over my head. There is therefore no incentive for poor people to go beyond or to move out of the poverty line. And that's the incentive which we get, in government. We feel that, look, we're not going to do anything except this amount of money in lump sum, we can use it whatever way you want. And that creates a change in mindset. And the change in mindset is very, very important because most of the time poverty is entrenched. It is a vicious cycle. You're poor because your dad was poor because his dad was poor. There's no reason for you to become not poor. When you change that mindset, it's a mindset change which can only exist when you don't provide state benefits like that, but only when you give cash handout, ladies and gentlemen. It's better because it assists them and it creates an option for them to go out of the poverty line, which doesn't exist in status quo. Last one we say, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why that in that situation is unfair because it's because of birth control, it's because of the capitalistic nature of the state. It is not that they choose to be poor, but they were there by chance. And because of that, I think that the state in everyone has the duty to make sure that they have the means to go out of that poverty. And because of that, we're very proud of that.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Close the opening half debate on the opposition.
Three extensions. 1. Can poor people effectively choose given their circumstances? Number 2, which model better alleviates poverty? And number 3, on development of new markets and investment, how's our model better for the economy as a whole? On the first argument of whether the poor can choose effectively, and James really said, we don't want to generalize it all in the same situation. But we are aware that poor people often face certain circumstances by which the government can create policies to best serve them. So the argument coming of OG is that the state has failed them because of capitalistic lottery, and therefore we should do something. The trouble with this argument is that it only says the state should do something. It doesn't say what that something is. We are saying that what that something should be means tested and particulars of the needs that they have, rather than give them a cash handout, which is likely to skew their incentives. So the other argument we get from opening government is this: that there are certain poor people, and we do not respect their right to choice. Unfortunately, Gina said this, that the trouble with poor people in that situation is that they're pressured by short-termist desires to spend because they're not sure when the next handout will come, given the government can be infrequent. But I now use the deacon's words against him. He said that poor people feel comfortable. That's precisely the point. Unfortunately, the poor people are not often used or exposed to things like healthy diets, going to school, going to university. As a result, if they get the cash handouts, the likelihood that their mindset will not be spending the same things they've always spent on is very high. In other words, unless you give them incentive to spend on groceries, they're not going to spend on fresh fruits and vegetables and something that can come, probably be Ramly burgers or tea bottles for the mama. The idea is this: if you want to make people see the future and open their minds, you often have to give them the choice. Make them use the money to go to school with education vouchers, so they go to school, get a better education, and realize that the world's a lot bigger than that. We need to eat healthy, so they do not need to spend so much time on alcohol. We think that in some cases we are okay with defending paternalism because it does sacrifice a amount of short-term choice for long-term development and welfare of not just the poor people, but also their children and their children's children. Let us now do some scenario analysis of both models. In their best case, if people magically spend the money and save it, all problems are solved. But it's unlikely, because the worst case they have, given all that Gina talked about, is that people will misuse the money and then it becomes a waste of public resources that could have been better allocated. On our side of the house, the best case scenario is that people spend exactly on what they need. They go to school, they achieve better outcomes, and in the worst case, if people cannot choose, at least we prevent them from making bad decisions. Which is to say, the worst case on our side is that the safety net prevents them from spending wrongly, and they are forced to spend on education even if they don't want to. So on both sides of the house, the best and worst case are far better on our side than the other side, and which is why this point is not true. We actually argue further on the other line that they may advance the line that not all poor people are the same, that they may have different needs. But the reason why MITI in Malaysia hires statisticians and policymakers, and the whole point why we have a government, is that we have a line of best fit. That we are able to see that at the provincial level, people tend to face these challenges, and therefore they tend to create common policies for them. This is why Jana argued about balance, because we do have the common policy to take care of the larger scale needs, and the small amount of cash handouts for families to tailor at the margins what they may find useful or not. So this is where our policy gives a greater sense of checks and balances versus the kind of freedom that we give families, although smaller, is significant. And they argued, they had the cheek to say that insurance is not important. Here's the point: these poor people, besides not being able to see the future, are also some of the most unhealthy individuals. So we argue this is why they need to be made to buy insurance before chronic diseases like atherosclerosis catch up with them in the long run, and which is why this is something particularly crucial for public health and public improvement. No, thank you. Second extension: how do we alleviate poverty effectively? And over here, we have this strange quibble in the PM and the DPM that they are only going to abolish the parts of the system that affect the poor people. Okay, assuming the best case scenario on the outside, that they're only to scrap the poor people part of the system. Now let's check. Health insurance works like this. A government health insurance puts everyone in the same pool so that the risk premium for the government for individuals goes down. Statistically, you cut even half the pool of the poor people out of the national health insurance scheme, the cost per unit of insurance goes up for everybody else. This is the same price for spending on health infrastructure, because at the point you're not building it for half the population, it becomes unjustifiable to spend on the national health service. Which is to say, the idea of cutting off half the people drags down national health costs for everybody and makes the racket worse off as a whole. The argument that, oh, the quantum is insufficient, we rather spend a lot of money on them, is not an argument for abolishing state welfare altogether. It's an argument for improving and targeting the system so that you have a better idea outcome of what people need. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to ask you, how does your status quo provide mobility for poor people?
Just get to that. So the argument that you raised is that we won't change prices, we need to change prices to get people to move up and up. But the argument is this: Your idea of cash handouts has no concrete lever on these people to see the world differently. Ours does. If you eat healthier, they're likely to fall sick less. If you go to school and speak English, they're likely to access more jobs. Only our model gives you some degree of ability to see the world and realize, I can do so much better than what I was doing before. And that's how our model is the only one that achieves some degree of changing mindset, whereas yours does not. Third argument, that of economic development, and here we have this strange argument that will create this new market for the bottom of the pyramid, where poor people will now be able to be this investment driver of the country. I have 4 rebuttals to this. Number one, I'm sorry, but since when has overseas investment come in because people spend on basic goods? Basic goods are called basic goods because they have very low margins. They do not have the power to attract foreign direct investors like the orang tinas down south in Singapore, who are going to come in for other industries like ICT, technology, and medicine. Second rebuttal, if you really want the low-cost industry to strive, then you should be spending money on the SMEs, not the poor people, which is a very indirect way of generating business. So if you want to support, let's say, SMEs, like Malaysia really does, in Malaysia Tech Ventures Berhad, then subsidize them directly. That's a good way to grow the economy. Third thing, we need investors often going because the workforce is healthy, is educated. And if you really want to talk about long-term investment to grow the nation, then the only way you're going to do this is to solve people's health problems, education problems, even if it is against their will. So this is where our policy directly ensures that they must go to school because all they get are education vouchers, so they will learn English in school, something which is really formal. And the fourth argument we want to advance is that cash handouts as a policy for promoting investment are not immune to inflation, deflation cycles. Let's face it, the ringgit lost a lot of its value recently. If you give cash handouts to these people, it will lose a lot of value there. But if you invest in infrastructure and education, these are in-kind transfers. They will not easily lose their value. So what we are saying is that stitch in time saves time. They are putting away some choice in the now for some empowerment in the tomorrow. We are very proud.
Thank you, the leaders of opposition. Open the debate from side closing. I talk about the member of government. We have to.
We understand, coming from the side of the government, the previous time coming from the side opening opposition, it's a mentality that people on the ground, people below the poverty line, have a short-term calculus in terms of when they get money. But we're also really confident on our side, we tackle this policy well, and we tackle the idea of having to give education or helping these people use their money more efficiently and decide personally. I want to talk to you about 3 things. Number one, what is the use of poverty that we really argue on our side? We characterize the idea of welfare that people in cities hold. Number two, we actually elevate the idea of poverty better on the side CG. And last but not least, we tackle the idea of short-term calculus mentality on our side. So firstly, what is the problem with welfare systems within states? To really argue and OG market and OU and sufficiently conclude that the problem within welfare systems is that it only allows you to sustain within right now. So they give you something there, but we think that the analysis that comes up from science CG is that the welfare is actually catered to improve the situation within the grounds that within welfare has skill. Because we need to characterize, number one, that healthcare and health benefits will only come to use for you when you actually need this, when you're actually sick, and when you actually need their healthcare purposes. But we need to do some arguments that will only help you when you actually need it. So you don't necessarily help people if they weren't sick, or if they didn't necessarily need healthcare. So we think that we need the purpose of what welfare is to help individuals as a whole. But secondly, on the second characterization, the idea of insurance is also generally very beneficial, assuming you don't actually buy the idea of insurance as a whole. So we think on our side, we cater to the needs of individuals when it comes to the idea of giving welfare, of actually elevating the idea of poverty. And we didn't argue that on the second level. Because you can see, at the very least, these are things that will help people within now and at the moment itself, but we need a justification that you find on your side that, oh, short-term calculus is the problem that is on your side. We're going to argue that better. Because we need to also regrettable that number one, you characterize poor people as people which cannot make decisions on their own. Number two, even if that's a problem, we can see that we can solve it. Because there's several reasons why we do so. Right? Number one, we can say this quote. The incentive for you to teach people how to spend their money within
status quo is not there because government sets what you actually need in society. It sets that you only need education, you only need healthcare on a certain number, on a certain level. So therefore, they think the idea of poverty is then regulated because it set the sense of what you need and what you don't need. Because of that cash handout, it is directly incentivized the states to actively participate in terms of giving education or in terms of educating people on the ground or how do you use that money or generally what is that money for? What do you actually need in society? How does it help you survive? We did an incentive going to do so only exists when the government realizes that these are people that actually have money and these are people that actually can use that money for themselves as a whole. But we recognize when they actually have money, they will also be more willing to listen because on the outside, you're also willing to argue that you already give education, but people on your grounds are not willing to listen. We're willing to argue that there are two groups of individuals. Number one, individuals that actually can use their money wisely and we think within the grounds of poor people. There are people which can use their money more wisely, and these are also people living on our side because they have their money more willing to elevate our poverty and generally they can still be undergo hard scenarios. But number two, the people that don't know how to use their money, before I go on,
Look, your policy impacts every other single individual in society. What's the incentive for these taxpayers to fund money to things like school and hospitals, given that there's no certainty that these individuals will utilize those infrastructure?
Obviously, that we think we really characterized inside open government that we only take away the idea of welfare for people below that poverty line. But even if we take away from every other single individual on the ground, we think those are individuals which are personal and effective because they are still using their money in return for taking away their welfare and they can effectively use their money. And the harms that we talked about having only short-term calculus is something that only affects people because you characterize people as people which are smart, as people which generally are better in terms of mentality when you use their money as well. So people think actually happens. But moving on to the second group of individuals, people that generally don't know how to use their money. We really argue that these are people that are hard money your side as well. Because we didn't say this before, we believe that these are people that generally also have money, but although it's not a lot, they also have their money. And you also have these people because you don't give them sufficient education in terms of how to use their money. But even if you do give these people education, these are people on our side that are more willing to listen. So even if in the short term, they maybe screw up their first handout, if they realize they just have screwed up their first handout, they will think that either of them having to be more willing to listen or being more willing to be using the education that the state provides to them, they are more willing to use that because they realize that I don't know what I do, I should spend my money, I need that more help that the state can provide. These are people on our side, they will have the incentive to actually go to your courses, go to all your education that you provide to these individuals, and they will effectively use that form of education better. And we think this is exactly the form of the clincher that you get on our side. We help this individual elevate from poverty because they don't understand what are the steps I need to do for me to get a better lifestyle, for me to get out of the poverty that I live in under our side. No, thank you. But last but not least, we need to argue lastly. Even if, because we need to argue under both paradigms, that there are people underground that will get harmed. So under both sides, there will be people that will demand the poverty line and will get sufficiently harmed. Even if those are people that will get sufficiently harmed under our side, we tell you that we still give you a better outcome under our side. Because even if, number one, we still at least respect your body autonomy and respect all the needs of you. So we need to argue with you, even if they live under the poverty line, at the very end of the day, at least they're happy with what they do with their lives. At least they realize, I have that money which I can use for whatever I want. So yes, even if I can spend my money on insurance, if I choose to spend on the education of my child in the near future, at least it's something that makes me happy, although I live under the poverty line. At the very end of the day, we give these people that necessity, or we give these people the ability for them to actually respect their body autonomy, for us to realize that as much as we realize we want the poverty line, at the very least, even if we don't give you sufficient in terms of getting out of the poverty line, we give you the ability for you to be happy in the life you're living. And we need to argue with you. If these are people that are willing to spend money on their education, on their child's education in the future, we then willing to argue with you that's actually as important as anything. As important as you spending your money on insurance, because we think if these are people on their grounds, which is still respond to the body autonomy for them to do so, that means that do so whatever they want. So you have the two conclusions. Number one, if the ideal of welfare is something going to help individuals get out of the idea of poverty and building a welfare that you find your side, although you protect them for the short term line, and although you engage in that, you will never elevate them from above that poverty line because you do recognize that these are people that actually can use their money efficiently, and you will always put them in their circular and perpetuating harm because you realize that these are people which will never ever spend money properly as a whole. On the second conclusion, you must realize that poverty is a long-term case scenario. So on our side, if we can help these people understand what they can do with their money better, then the long-term benefit comes under our side because that long-term benefit is them understanding what can I do with their money, or how do I use that money better under our side. And we think these are people under our side that will generally marginally have a benefit the poverty under our side may marginally beneficial. And last but not least, the idea of people which will be harm and inevitably at both sides, and we can both sides of people in terms of giving them a better lifestyle. If not a better lifestyle, a happier one.
Madam Speaker, this is the problem coming from South. Like they come out and they claim to us that their policy is much more better. I'll deconstruct that idea. Let's take a look at rebuttals. Firstly, coming from closing government, the idea of welfare. And they came out a large chunk of their arguments for like how we are able to educate people to spend their money. Firstly, we tell them that that's not exclusive under their case, it's something that we can do under our case. But secondly, because the only way they can make that argument is they specifically tell us why a change in policy can motivate people to go and get educated on how to spend their money. Something they didn't do for us. But let's take a look of some extensions. Firstly, the idea of how people spend money. Like we think that people spend, how do poor people spend money in particular? Because we are talking about people who live like price makan pagi, like the amount of money you get is only sufficient for you to live today, right, or tomorrow. Right? They do not have money to invest in long-term benefits such as insurance, such as healthcare. Number one, we think this is where the government should step in. The reason we think that it's all right for governments to intervene and take away to provide our policy is that government stepping where people need it. We already told you under our status quo we can provide cash handouts, or we do provide cash handouts. That's the comparative of this debate. The benefits that come from their side when we abolish the kind of system that we have, the kind of insurance and healthcare that we have under our case. Those are the kind of benefits that you have to come up and particularly tell us not for them to win their case. But we think it's detrimental. Why? Because we tell them how do people spend their money. We tell them if you give people cash handouts, let's say 500, no matter how much the amount, unless it's a significantly large amount, we think that people are narrow-minded. Right? They will spend money on everyday goods, right? on food and etc. And etc. Why? Because this is the kind of goods that they derive utility from now. Right? We think that's important. That's how people make decisions, and that's why government should come and step in and tell you that you know what, we need to provide you with some form of healthcare insurance and whatnot, because it is the government's role to help people out generally. Right? Yes.
So you're telling us that the worst case scenario of our side is that they'll buy things which they get under your side. That's the worst case we will find. What about people who use that money wisely?
Okay, the problem is with their worst case is that this is the problem, right? You remove all forms of like insurance, healthcare that you give these poor people, and you give them, let's say, 500, you get a month, and it's up to you for you to allocate like to where it goes, right? We've already told you how you most probably do not spend this money on insurance at the end of the day, and they came out and considered was like okay that they're not on insurance. This is ridiculous, right? Because number one, insurance is important for risk, right? But the worst case scenario under their case is not that. What's the worst case scenario? They spend that 500 ringgit on everyday goods and not have insurance, right? But at the end of the day, because they've already abolished the kind of other systems that are there to protect these individuals and provide them with insurance, where do they then go? We think that this is a problem because then they do not have access to health insurance, and because they've already abolished the kind of systems in place to help them, right? They're essentially dead, right? Unless they go and borrow money whatsoever. That's the problem with like the worst case scenario under their case, that people spend money and then you know what? When I need medical health care, I'm dead because I spent my money wrongly, right? As opposed to our case, where we're fine with giving people cash handouts, but let's say if you spend those cash handouts every day, we already do have infrastructure within place to help you out with the kind of problem that you have at the end of the day. Why? Because we think that's important, right? Because it is also the government's role not to just try to help people move up upward mobility, but to also protect them from the wrong decisions that they can make at the end of the day. That's something that our side can deal with, right? Not yes. But let's take a look at
The worst case scenario is that they buy an iPhone. But an average reasonable person that realizes I cannot sustain the buying iPhone, sooner or later will they realize what they actually need in their lifetime.
Yeah, how is that different from under our case, right? It's not, right? Even if that not different from our case. Why is it particularly that you abolish the kind of insurance system that suddenly people come to a realization that, you know what, I need to spend money on healthcare? Not necessarily true, right? I think that's a problem. But let's look at this idea of like public sentiment. Right? This is important because we think that the moment you abolish the kind of structure that you have within it, such as healthcare insurance, right? And when people make those mistakes, who do they then look up to? Right? Who do they then look like? Once they spend that amount of money on all that stuff except insurance, except for long-term benefits, right? Who do they then look up to? They look up to the government, which is why we think it is important to maintain such structures within place, right? Because under our case, what we told you that they can access this even if they do not spend their money wisely. Right? But what is the best model for in terms of upward mobility? Because we think it's also important for governments to take a look at the idea of upward mobility and try to help people come out of poverty. Right? It's also under our case, right? Why? Because you force people to allocate money on necessities which we think are important, such as education. Right? Because we tell you that there will be parents, if you give them an option, not to send their children to school, as opposed to, like, let's say, working on a farm, that they would take that option. Right? I think that's not necessarily a beneficial option. Why? Because we also already told you, they look at the kind of short-term benefits that come from, like, sending the children and working on a farm, as opposed to, like, going to education. So even in terms of upward mobility, it means under our case that it is best that people have access to, right? Because you have a bare minimum of structures within place to help protect you and to have like a safety bottom, even if you make the wrong decision, right?
A middle class citizen in a non-free healthcare country can choose not to buy insurance and be screwed. Why do you afford for poor people the same liberty to make that same mistake as you allow your middle class?
Because we tell you that middle class people are different. Because we tell you, number one, middle class people have the ability to use the money. Like if they do spend it, if they don't spend it wisely now, they still have the ability to finance, let's say, a surgery that you may need. Very different from like a very poor person who would have to go for cancer surgery, because that's something that they would definitely want to have an option for. Something the middle class person would have an option for at the end of the day, and they can take a loan if they spend all their money. You think that kind of the amount of kind of access that you have in terms of poor people is definitely not in comparison like the middle class people. Right? So we think that it's fine, and even we think that protecting the middle class is still not such a big deal. Like we're okay with protecting the middle class. We do not say that we're okay with providing free healthcare like the middle class people as well. It's not a problem. Right? But let's take a look at the idea of like in comparison of both cases. Because we tell that under their case, there's no safety net. Like the whole reason a government should be there is to provide a safety net. Given that governments know people spend their money, they don't spend their money wisely. Under our case, we tell you at best and at worst, people do have access to healthcare if they spend their money badly. Under their case, you don't, right? So we think that the idea of upward mobility always stands at our place, not their standard.
First debate from side government here.
The idea of a safety net seems very nice towards everyone. But the problem with that is that safety net comes at the expense of these poor people. Because why these poor people don't need this healthcare? Why these poor people don't need this safety net? It's because we need a safety net which is where they stay in this particular zone because they're always comfortable in it and they don't have the opportunities to break out of that zone. Because the money the money that you could have spent on maybe doing things like FDI or investing in your child is instead spent on doing things like health insurance and things like that, which you may or may not need. And that's why we think it's up to the parents to have the autonomy as to whether or not you should choose whether you want to spend this or not. And that's why we think that there's a stark difference between both that sides. Because we already said that if you need healthcare, we allow you to spend on healthcare. But the difference here is we allow you to choose what you need the most, and we allow you to prioritize what you need the most. Because you may say that poor people always indulge in what short-term benefits. I think also poor people also recognize that sometimes I need to see a doctor to survive, right? So generally we think that people have the basic instincts to know what to spend on and what not to spend on. But more importantly, under your side, they won't have that. Because the education under your side is based on having safety nets in which the government will always protect you, and the short cash flows that I'll give you, like what they characterize, is going to be spent anyway. Therefore, the education on how to spend your money wisely will never be effective because you will never have the money to spend it anyway, and individuals will always be apathetic in these classes because they think that what's the point of long-term investments when I don't have the capacity to have these long-term investments. Two issues today. Number one, will status quo help alleviate poverty? And secondly, how individuals spend on their house. Before that, few points of responses towards the closing side. First, let's just point this out that most of their analysis has been rehashes of what the opening has already said. The only new nuances that they have is that in this way, it's a safety net for these individuals. And what if you spend too much and in the end, you can't spend anymore on healthcare? We have a few responses to this. Because firstly, number one, we allow people to choose, right? So generally, you can't assume that everyone needs health benefits and everyone needs groceries and things like that. Generally, people have different proportionalities on what they need, and therefore, we give the lump sum of money so that you can choose proportionally what you need, and that's a benefit coming from outside, right? But more importantly, what if in some instance you spend all your money and generally like you don't have any more money for healthcare? We think that number one, we doubt this will happen because individuals wouldn't get 5,000 and spend 5,000 on groceries in one day. We think that's very unlikely. That will only happen under your side when you don't know where you're going to get these health benefits and it's extremely sporadic. Under our side, we have long term giving you these funds so you know that generally I need to plan out my spending even better. But even if they screw up once, Kimberly already told you that generally that these people will be able to realize and learn from their mistakes that I should not spend all my money in one go and I should choose how I spend my ways. So even if these people will be harmed, at least these people will learn from their mistakes and they'll move on from that. They didn't take that down. So firstly, we'll status quo alleviate poverty. The best benefit that they can get under their side is that you realize that once you go into this English speaking school, it's beneficial to learn English. Or if I get this healthcare and things like that, in the end, it's a good thing to be able to invest in these long-term things. The problem is that there's a cap to what your benefit is. Because the cap is that you realize that maybe I should invest in these long-term things. And that's the best case scenario. But what can you do then? Because all the money that you could be spending on, for example, spending on FDIs and things like that, you don't have the capacity to spend it anymore. Because under your side, you force that money to do things that you don't necessarily need. So therefore, the realization that you have under your side is short term. Because once you realize that you need to get out of this poverty zone and I need to spend more money wisely, you don't have any money to spend wisely. So therefore, under your side, the best thing that you can have is people realizing that I need to spend wisely. But in the end, since you already said that we barely give cash handouts anyway, what can you do with that 500 ringgit? You don't think they can alleviate that. Sit down. But then also, clothing said some idea about how now individuals, since that we don't force these individuals to go to school, now we'll make our children work in farms and spend on things like that. We think generally under your side that will happen also because parents have the autonomy to choose whether I think this is beneficial or not and force their kids to stay here or there. At least comparatively under our side, the parents won't waste their money not sending their kids to school, right? The money that they get from not sending their kids to school can be used on their farm and things like that. So therefore, even if they make bad choices, at least the bad choices and the harms of these bad choices will be minimized.
The worst case scenario isn't that you're spending it on things like education and welfare, but it's also things like bad decisions, things like buying alcohol or prioritizing other things as opposed to insurance. You need to defend that worst case scenario.
Yes, but here's the thing, right? And we already see this time and time again. That is our worst case scenario. But once individuals learn that they can't sustain it anymore because they have no government facilities to back them up, that's when you spend wisely in the end. And we even went to a certain extent that maybe sometimes individuals should be able to spend on things like alcohol because they were born poor doesn't necessarily mean that they have to live a life of sustainability where they go around in circles and circles trying to get food all the time. Maybe we should let them enjoy once more. Sit down. How individuals spend under our side? On the first level, right? How do individuals spend? Why do individuals spend that money now? Because we think that education and welfare classes are seen as useless things towards the general public and towards the people in poverty. Because the focus of these classes is how do you manage to sustain yourself in getting all this money as a whole. Unfortunately, people are apathetic towards these things and they don't necessarily converse well with these teachings because number one, they don't have enough money to actually be able to use the things that they have learned in the class because there's sporadic cash handouts. And that's the thing that what they say, right? When you have things like once a year where you get 500 ringgit, you're not going to keep it for the next year and accumulate your money so that you can have the FDI. You just spend it and that's the harm under your side. Because all the cash handouts that you guys get under your side will always be spent because generally I don't have enough to have long-term investments. You need to understand that long-term investments need a lot of money and that's why under our side, when you have cash handouts and a lot of money, that's when you can generally help out in these long-term things, right? The only response that what they say is that it's not mutually exclusive. They can have education under their side too. The thing is, our education is better because now you know that I have nothing to fall back on, and the government is teaching me how I should spend my money. That's why individuals will spend their money properly, and that's why education is better under our side. So let's move on, right? So generally that means that individuals will be able to know how to spend their money and be able to choose what they want. Because the comparative is simple, right? Under our side, if you don't spend the money, like if you spend 1 month not going to that hospital, that means that you lose some money because in the end you're not accessing the government facilities. Under our side, the money will be given to you. So you have more money and more liberties to spend on what you want. But even if you spend unwisely, we think number one, it's your choice on how you spend your money. But number two, if it harms you that much, you learn from your mistakes and you move on from there. We think that's extremely beneficial. Thank you.
Hey, you have money, yeah. Friends are online. Oh, okay. You want power? Sorry.
Two questions today. Which side does the poor become more complacent in? Whether the poor become more complacent on their side, or the poor becomes more complacent on our side. Now, what happens is now when you go ahead and give poor people cash handouts instead of subsidizing whatever can be, whether it's their food ration, their housing, or whatever. Now we're telling it's okay for the poor people to go ahead and give the poor people money. So now, which side do you think the poor is going to be more complacent in? Where you're throwing money at them on a monthly basis, or whether it is a 3-4 months basis or whatever, or for us to always replace a status quo in place where the basic rights of the poor are already taken care of. Why do we think it's better on our side that the poor have a better way of fighting out from whichever poverty line that they are under? So now, when you have your basic rights in place, then you have whatever that you need basically to survive on a day-to-day basis. Now you can actually fight on the needs of education. That you can fight to remove yourself from the poverty line that is now pushing you so hard to probably worst case scenario, like you're going to die of some sad disease or whatever. Now, what happens is they talked about how there are two classes of poor people: the poor people who are rational, and the poor people who are irrational. So let's talk about which side helps both groups of poor people. We say that our side provides a basic platform for basic rights for both the parties. And now both parties are dealt with whether or not you spend your money wisely or whether or not you don't. So what happens now is that whether or not you spend your money wisely, you're taken care of, and your basic rights, everything is settled. So now you can actually work harder on helping yourself be a better person or whatever you want to do. The justification for the safety net is now that both parties are taken care of, and the state has done its job to help you in whatever daily needs you need. Yes.
In your situation where the people are comfortable because government isn't your bank, with the fact that they don't have money, where is the incentive for them to go upwards?
No. What happens on our side is that we already lay down a platform and say this is basically what we need to live. And now if you want to live more comfortably, go ahead and work harder on a daily basis. Instead of your side where you say, hey, here's more money, go and spend it on a daily basis, and this is justification. Yeah, sure. Okay, now you give a person, let's say for example, a few thousand on for this month, and he goes ahead and he spends everything on whatever he wants. And what is he going to do for the rest of the month? Is he just going to suffer and sit at his home and not eat, not drink, or whatever he wants to do? And then what happens? He's going to go into a worse state than he ever was, start stealing and doing whatever he has. But on our side, we say, hey, we've already provided everything that you need, and now go ahead and work harder for what you want, because you will not have to worry about things like housing, about your basic needs and things like this. And what happens when you give them money instead of providing a housing for them? What if they choose irrationally and for that month they can't pay their rent, or for the next few months they can't pay their rent? We have more people on the streets and things like this. And now you talked about how poor people not have enough capital to elevate themselves on poverty. Right now, there are these schemes in place like microeconomic schemes to help people give them enough capital on a daily basis. And the main idea for the state to provide welfare is to so that the state can help these poor people out of their poverty. And the state is going to give them enough things right now as it is to provide to live a simple life. And when you talk about how what happens when you give people more purchasing power, people some of them probably rational, some will probably not be rational, some are not so rational. What happens is that when you throw at them more money on a daily basis, they're just going to go spend on things that they probably don't need. They're going to spend on luxuries that they don't need right now, things they probably cannot afford right now. And it's highly improbable that these poor people are going to make calls that are very, to see themselves in the future. And the way came up here and told you that the poor people aren't going to waste their money sending their kids to school. So now you suggest that we give them more money and you hope that they will send their kids to school. That you hope that when they throw all their money away, that suddenly they're going to think, oh, I need education right now, I need to learn how to spend my money. No, that's not what the poor people are going to do. Although a majority of them may be rational, and you have the smaller majority that are irrational, but whatever that's going to happen is they're going to think of how are they going to better, work out of this. Instead of spending their time, they're going to be working harder and harder to get out of this poverty bracket. Yes.
Poor people within status quo does not even have the mindset to go and pursue education. That's your status quo. What happens towards poor people who actually have a choice to help them to actually elevate from poverty?
No, on our side, there's always state-provided education where you have free education for anyone and everyone. And what happens now is that you were talking about how there's no sufficient education, but now you're saying that by giving them money, we are hoping that they'll go learn better for themselves. We believe that on our side, it's better for the poor people to make rational choices now because we say that we already have provided you education, we are subsidizing your housing, and we are giving you food rations and food coupons. So now you have your food, your shelter, and your water bills or whatever taken care of, and now you have more drive to come out of this poor situation to find out because let's accept it, not everyone in poverty wants to live there and wants to be feeding themselves once a day or twice a day or thrice a day. They all want to work harder to come out of that bracket. So it's their rational mindset right now to say, hey, this is what we can afford, and to afford more, we've got to go learn more, we've got to go and help ourselves by we're getting some education. And this is how our bracket is more reliable because on their bracket it says, hey, here's money, go ahead and spend it because right now you see that you already have enough money in front of you. And what happens in our paradigm is that the safety net is that everything is provided for you. Now to work yourself out of this current bracket that you're in, you're going to have to work even harder. And they talked about how the poor people are going to start investing in foreign direct schemes and things like this. They are not going to invest in that because they don't invest in insurance that already provides them a safety net for them to do whatever they want. Now, on our side, we believe that it's better because people have basic instincts. They know that right now their basic needs have been taken care of, and therefore they'll be working harder towards whatever they want. So with that, I'm proud to